Welcome, my fellow door openers, to another episode of Doors of the Universe podcast. It has been 2 months since I have released a new episode. My personal life has been very busy. That's all we need to talk about on that. But as you can see, or as you may hear, or if you're watching this on YouTube, seen, if you're listening to this on your favorite distributor of podcasts, then you're just hearing the changes that have taken place. Couple things. I've got basically a brand new setup, which led to some issues last week for me to record. I think I got all the glitches fixed in that, and we are now good to go. So we're here today recording. I got a new mic. I upgraded to the more professional Shure SM7B. Shure is not a sponsor of this podcast, but I figured it was time for me to get a better audio setup. Part of the concern is I know in the past I've had issues with audio not being as loud as it should be. Definitely having a lower audio output with my Blue Yeti microphone, which also all these years of recording podcasts, it's been working great, but I was ready to try and upgrade to the next level. So I used my setup currently is the Shure SM7B with a Focusrite for the preamp and a cloud lifter to get my microphone to the level where it needs to be so it can be. The Focusrite does well at getting the volume up, but not as loud as it needs to be without having staticky background noise. So yeah, that's new. Upgraded the camera as well. This all took place a while back. It's just been a while getting to this point of recording, actually getting everything set up. As you can see behind me, there is a background picture. What I'm planning on doing is having a new background picture each episode. This current one is by Jeremy Thomas. It is off of Unsplash. If you look it up, they have a ton of... I had never used the site before, but I came across it when searching for free, high-quality photos. When you're sharing it, you check the copyrights on it, but it'll be, I'll share a link to Jeremy's page. I don't know Jeremy Thomas. I came across his pictures through Unsplash, and I like them a lot. There's going to be a couple from him, and I found some other ones I downloaded as well. So yeah, check out Unsplash if you're looking for some high-quality photos that you can use without any copyright, or some have copyright, some don't. You might have also noticed the new intro song. That was done by... I utilized Fiverr. If you haven't utilized Fiverr, that is fiverr.com. Fiverr is a great site for finding people to do different things that may come up, whether it be graphic design, music. I don't know. I've used it for graphic design and music so far. That's about it. The different categories you can use it for are graphic design, programming and tech, digital marketing, video and animation, writing and translation, music and audio, business, consulting, data, and AI services. So yeah, it's a great site to use if you need something made for you that you can't do yourself. I use Gustavo Plaza, who is from Argentina. I was looking for something more dark wave, synth pop kind of sound for the intro to the podcast. And his band is Telefonema. I'll include a link to the Fiverr page with the actual job I had them do. But yeah, there's been a ton of changes. Lots happened in 2 months. So yeah, That's where we're at now. But you're like, Aaron, all these things are great. I love hearing about everything that's going on here. I love hearing about all these upgrades, these things you've done to make the podcast better. But you know what I'm really here for. And I do know what you're really here for. So let us get into what you're really here for, which is the squonk. The squonk. What is the squonk, you say? So I say the squonk that I'm talking about is not a vape, because there is not a ton of information on the squonk itself, but there are plenty of pages on the squonk vape. So this is not about that. If you're looking for the squonk vape, you're in the wrong podcast. I'm sure there is a podcast that goes over how best to set up your squonk vape, but this ain't it, Jack. So one minor thing also while doing this research, I know I talked about on the last episode with Zero Goblin about the deleted internet theory, where the internet's being gone through and just kind of cleared off of a bunch of information that used to be there. I know it's a theory, but the reality is when I go and search for things, there are a lot less pages there than there used to be. I don't know who's clearing up the Google searches. I don't know, because there used to be like, you'd find 20, 30 pages of information about certain things. Now, mind you, everyone I've talked, every episode I've listened to has said how little information there is on the squonk, which is fine. But this has been coming up in other situations as well, where I'll be searching for something and there'll be one page of search results. Where did all the other search results go? And you know what? If it is like tightening it up a little bit and making it better, so my research isn't as scattered or out there, I'm just getting a bunch of garbage results. I'm cool with that. I'm good with us clearing it up. But also it bothers me when there's certain things I know should have more pages and there's not. Either way, the squonk we're talking about today are folkloric mythical creatures that are reported to live in the hemlock forest of Pennsylvania near the Pocono Mountains. Squonks are shy, warty creatures. What a description. Shy, warty creatures that cry constantly over their ugly appearance. Legend says you can find them by following their trail of tears. The squonk is a type of fearsome critter, a group of creatures likely created by early Western pioneers and lumberjacks of North America. Let me just say, lumberjack lore is pretty cool. Makes me kind of wish I had been a lumberjack during the times these stories were being written in the early 1900s, where you're coming up with all these stories to tell by the fireside. Just sitting around after a long day of jacking and telling stories about creatures that just cry in the woods. That's good living. I mean, to me, that is. Like, you get to do a little camping, a little cutting down. I mean, controlled cutting down of trees, not just consuming, and then we'll also we'll plant more trees as we cut the trees down. That's my angle, my lumberjacking dreams. But talking about its origins and whatnot, the squonk first appeared in William Thomas Cox's 1910 book, Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods, which you might recognize that title if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, because that book also features the Gumbaroo, which I did an episode, one of the first couple episodes, I think, that I did for the podcast. When I was going through the Rogue Brewery line of Cryptid beers they were putting out, which included the Gumbaroo. I have the cans here. Which included the Gumbaroo, the Bat Squatch, and Colossal Claude. If you haven't heard or listened to those episodes, check them out. But yeah, the Gumbaroo was another one that was a creature featured in the Fearsome Creatures, the Lumberwoods, which I will include a link to where you can read it for free, because it is more than 100 years old and no longer bound by copyright. So the internet can put it out there and share it, and we can read it for free. Back to William T. Cox and his Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods. Cox was the first state forester of Minnesota. What is a forester, you ask? That's a good question, because I too had the same question and looked it up. Foresters oversee forest land, manage budgets, create plans for forestry projects, and supervise forest and conservation technicians and workers. In addition, foresters ensure that forest crew activities comply with government regulations. The book was dedicated to the concatenated order of the Hoo-Hoo and all who know the Fellowship of the Woods. Hoo-Hoo in the early 1900s was another name for a lumberjack. I mean, it may still be. But yeah, the Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods is a fun book just full of a bunch of North American lumberjack folklore, creatures you would find in the woods as you were lumberjacking. The Squonk's scientific name is Lacrimocorpus dissolvens. It comes from the Latin words for tear, body, and dissolve. So what's this Squonk looking like? Unlike many mythological creatures, the supposed physical characteristics of the Squonk remain unchanged from the original written account. Squonks are unusual-looking beasts with saggy skin, warts, moles, and webbed feet. They constantly cry because they look so hideous. Cox says that the Squonk is a very unhappy creature with a low mental ability, that it always weeps over his ugly appearance. Tryon later described the Squonk as having webbing between the toes on its left foot, and only its left foot, causing it to swim in circles forever. Tryon also says that the fossil bones dredged from those lake bottoms reveal that thousands of Squonks died of starvation because they couldn't get back to shore. In the 2015 retelling of Tryon's book by Hal Johnson, the Squonk is a kind of pig with warts, cauliflower ears, and covered in wax and hair, and yellow crooked tusks. The legend holds that the creature's skin is ill-fitting, covered with warts, and that because it is ashamed of its appearance, it hides from plain sight and spends most of its time weeping. That's just sad. This is a tale of learning to love yourself, because if you don't, you'll soon hear what happens to a Squonk when it gets too sad. We'll go ahead and just do the reading about the Squonk in the Fearsome Creatures. The nice thing about the Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods is that it also gives you a illustration with each creature that's described in it. But this is what it says about the Squonk. The Squonk, Lacrimocorpus dissolvens. The range of the Squonk is very limited. Few people outside of Pennsylvania have ever heard of the quaint beast, which is said to be fairly common in the hemlock forests of the state. The Squonk is of a very retiring disposition, generally traveling about at twilight and dusk. Because of its misfitting skin, which is covered with warts and moles, it is always unhappy. In fact, it is said by people who are best able to judge to be the most morbid of beasts. Hunters who are good at tracking are able to follow a Squonk by its tear-stained trail, for the animal weeps constantly. When cornered and escape seems impossible, or when surprised and frightened, it may even dissolve itself in tears. Squonk hunters are most successful on frosty moonlight nights, when the tears are shed slowly and the animal dislikes moving about. It may be then heard weeping under the boughs of dark hemlock trees. Mr. J.P. Wintling, formerly of Pennsylvania, but now at St. Anthony Park, Minnesota, had a disappointing experience with a Squonk near Mont Alto. He made a clever capture by mimicking the Squonk and inducing it to hop into a sack in which he was carrying it home, when suddenly the burden lightened and the weeping ceased. Wetling unslung the sack and looked in. There was nothing but tears and bubbles. Bubbles and tears. So that is the accounting from 1910 when Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods came out. One of the podcasts I was listening to brought up an interesting thought here. As we know, as we have come to know them, from our experience and our exposure of what we've been told growing up, the lumberjack is definitely more of a manly man. When you think of the brawny man, strong, tough paper towels. But little do you know that the brawny man often used those same paper towels to clean up all your best spills, to clean up the tears of the sadness he had to shed in privacy. Because in a time when men were men and men didn't cry was the time of lumberjacks. But what if lumberjacks came up with the Squonk to be able to give themselves the opportunity to remain strong, manly men who don't cry and don't show their emotions, but had this beast they made up so they could go into the forest and cry and then just say, "Oh, I was sorry, I was chasing a squonk and it sprayed me or something, got in my eyes. I don't know what happened. That must have been what you were hearing." I'm just saying. It seems like that could be a very real possibility, that the squonk was made up so men could feel their emotions in the woods. Let me reassure all the men that are listening to this right now that it is okay to cry. It is healthy to cry. It is healing to cry. If you haven't had a good cry lately, I highly recommend setting aside a time to allow yourself to do that. I said it's healing, but it's only healing if you also are able to properly process the emotions that you're feeling and see where they're coming from, being able to sit with it and just, process why you're feeling the need to cry and where this crying's come from. But I digress. That's a talk for another time. But let me just say to all the men out there, just cry it out. You'll feel better afterwards. I promise you will. With that out of the way, though, with that secondary theory out of the way of where the squonk comes from, we'll go back to a 1977. We'll go back to a 1977 article from the Dune County News from, I'm going to probably pronounce it wrong, Menominee, Wisconsin. They gave us a much better background of the squonk on January 19th, 1977, with a snippet on page 34 of their paper talking about how the legendary beast goes back to the 1700s with the story of Harmon Beck. The title reads, Squonk Cries in Forests of Pennsylvania. If you should ever happen to visit the state of Pennsylvania, you might hear a story that goes something like this. Way back in the 1700s, Pennsylvania was a wilderness area trampled only by the brave young pioneers. Master Harmon Beck owned a piece of farmland on the edge of a hemlock forest. I believe it's hemlock, but it says hamlock. It's H-A-M. On the edge of a hemlock forest. Becky's wife and infant son lived in a tiny shanty he built from logs in the forest. A milk cow, 5 chickens, 1 rooster, a goat, and an old tired collie dog lived in the small barn also built from hemlock trees. Beck made a fair living farming his homestead, and all was peaceful for the family, except for one thing. The story went on to say that the Becks were frightened by the noise of weeping noises from the woods. Beck grabbed his shotgun and stormed out the door. When he was in the hemlock forest that surrounded his home, he saw the wet grass and followed it, beginning to hear strange noises and weeping, getting louder as he got closer. And then the paper reported right in front of his eyes, the Squonk. Then he saw it. Back to the newspaper article. Then he saw it, leaning up against a large rock with the ugliest creature he'd ever seen. It was about the size of a dog, but its skin sagged and bagged as if it didn't fit right. The eyes were large, bloodshot, and tears poured from them. As Beck stood staring, the monster sobbed and carried on. Now Beck prided himself in being a merciful sort. And he figured the creature was wounded. He raised his gun, intending to put the creature out of its misery. As he aimed, the stupid creature became so frightened it actually covered itself entirely with tears. Within moments, it had disappeared. Beck lowered his gun and scratched his head. All that was left of the creature was a huge puddle of tears. The creature was later identified as a Squonk. Now nearly extinct, it is said that Squonks still haunt the hemlock forests of Pennsylvania. So there you have it. That was a telling of the 1700s. Squonks going as far back as the 1700s. Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods. Full title is Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods with a Few Desert and Mountain Beasts. Came out in 1910. And then in 1912, we have a poem that is published. It's printed in publications across the country. The original source is from the Cincinnati Enquirer on February 22nd of 1912. Yeah, let's go ahead and let's read this one out as well. My pop and me played hunters, and my pop told me the name of every beast we killed, and we sure shot some awful game. We got a Squonk behind the door, and then we got a bwang. And Pop nailed Bildads by the score whenever I'd say bang. We killed big winks beneath the bed and squiddles in a trunk. And then my ma came and said to Pop, "You brute, you're drunk." So there you have it. Did the child actually see them? Or were they delirium tremors set off by alcoholism? No, I do not encourage hunting squonks. I feel like, much like every other creature, they should be entitled to live as they choose, where they choose, and not let humanity get in the way of that. You could have yourself a bit of a big year scenario. Just go out and just, track them, take some pictures. I mean, you can even say you saw it if you didn't. I mean, that's up to you. I'm someone that if I say I saw something, I want to actually have seen it and not just tell people I saw it. So, yeah, go big ear yourself some. If you're not familiar with what a big ear is, it's where you go out and try and. There was a movie with Jack Black, Steve Martin, and Luke Wilson where they go out and they're trying to take pictures of as many birds as possible in a 1 year period. It was an alright movie. I don't know. Either way, I'm all for a big year as opposed to a big year hunt. But yeah, that poem is phenomenal. It's moving. Made me feel things I didn't know I could feel. That was 1912 for you. Moving forward, in 1919, the Squonk was further legitimized by being included in H.L. Mencken's The American Language Supplement 1. In 1924, Ned Hicks, a lumberjack, wagered 1,000 pounds of sterling silver with his boss. He could capture a Squonk. In telling the story, he said he was out hunting 5 hours, then he heard a sound, what sounded like a weeping baby. To Hicks, that is the sweetest music he had heard because he knew it was a Squonk. Crying baby in the woods. Sweetest music he's heard. Ideally, I would lean to think if I were out hunting, even if I was out hunting Squonk, the thought of hearing a crying baby in the woods would be so terrifying. I mean, especially if you're out there by yourself. I'm one of those people that if I'm with people, I'm less likely to get scared. But if I'm out there in the woods by myself and I hear a crying baby, that is me listening to hear where that sound is coming from and going the exact opposite direction. One, I don't know how to take care of children. Two, even if it is 99% of the time in every horror movie I've seen, if you're hearing a crying baby, it's not a real live actual crying baby. At least 99% of the horror movies I've seen. And just anything in the woods crying. It's just, maybe I just need to spend more time in the woods. Maybe I need to be out there. Like what was it? It was one of the other episodes. I think it was the Ozark Howler. I had heard an elk's bugle for the first time. And the elk's bugle is they bugle when they, I don't know, howl, or the noise they make is called bugling. But either way, if I were in the woods by myself, or even with people, and I heard an elk's bugle, I'm probably out. But that's just because I grew up in the Midwest, and camping wasn't one of our main things. I didn't start camping until I was an adult, and when I camped, I was drinking. That meant if we were going camping, we were drinking. So, I mean, you're not really afraid. You're just all boozed up and you pass out and you wake up and you start drinking again. But either way, I have done camping without alcohol or the use of drugs. And yeah, I don't know. It's just, I haven't had a lot of outdoor exposure. So I think maybe that would be where a lot of my fear comes from, is not being somebody who is fully acclimated to the noises of the woods. But also, I've seen too many horror movies that take place in the woods. Which actually, I can't even think of what that... I'm trying to think what that one movie I watched was. The Ritual. Which honestly, one of my favorite horror movies, actually... Let's not say that. Let's not say one of my favorite horror movies. One of the horror movies I can enjoy watching was called The Ritual from 2017. If you haven't seen it and you enjoy horror movies, I would recommend checking it out. It's that was one that kind of I liked, and I can't normally say that about a lot of horror movies, just because, again, I'm not a big horror movie fan. Just because if it's done right, I will be sleeping with the light on for a week. Maybe 2 weeks if it's done really right. But either way, yeah. When I go camping, I do enjoy it. As long as the weather's right. But yeah, it's just something I didn't have a lot of exposure to when I was young. And didn't really get what do you want to call it? Desensitized, I guess. To a certain degree, not desensitized. I don't know. I think, like I said, acclimated to the sounds of the woods. But as I learn more, the less I am afraid. So yeah, I do enjoy going camping. We did go on a camping trip once, and there was a square dancing group that was camping using the campsite we were using at, but they were on the opposite side of the lake. So you're just out there, and what it sounds like is you can hear the music all the way across the lake, and you can see the lights where they are. But mind you, at this point, me and my ex didn't realize that they were there camping or what the group was doing over there. But it had a very cultish, like religious cult feel to it. I don't know why. But anyways, back to Ned Hicks. So he's out there. He hears a crying baby in the woods. Hicks followed the animal for 3 hours. So at this point, it's 8 hours into his hunt. He yelled in the style of a squonk until his target staggered into a paper bag Hicks was holding. Who is capturing animals in paper bags? I mean, like, I feel like there should be like I mean, at this time, I would picture somebody carrying a burlap sack, maybe, to be hunting for. It's a paper bag. How? I mean, are you not worried about it like scratching through the bag, ripping the bag open? I don't know. Story seems a little sus. All right, that's all I'm saying. Either way, he took the bag back to camp, and when he got there, only salt water and bubbles were in it when he opened the bag. Pretty much the same story as Babe and the Blue Ox account of the Squonk. Say what? You didn't know that? Yeah. Squonk shows up in Babe and the Blue Ox account. And if you're not familiar with Babe and the Blue Ox, you should be, because it is a fun American folklore tale, which I was thinking about doing that at some point, going over American folklore. I feel like a lot of people may have not been introduced to it, or just, I don't know. Either way, there's a lot of great folklore out there. There's John Henry, there's Babe the Blue Ox, there's Pecos Bill. A lot of good folklore from the early 1900s. That would be my guess. I learned about it. I remember it's probably Disney did shorts on like the different people that were in American folklore. Johnny Appleseed's another one. But yeah, just a revisiting of those could be fun. But yeah, Babe and the Blue Ox. Sorry, I said Babe and the Blue Ox, thinking Babe was the name of the main character. It wasn't. I need to revisit too. Paul Bunyan was American lore lumberjack, and Babe, his blue ox, was this giant ox. Yeah, Paul Bunyan was a giant. He was 7 in the story. He was 7 foot tall. And Babe was his companion. I don't know, his pet companion. Babe the Blue Ox, which was also just this ginormous blue ox. The book that it appears in is Paul Bunyan and His Great Blue Ox. In this 1964 book by Wallace Wadsworth, one of the loggers hears wailing in the woods, mimics its cry, and catches a squonk in his bag. However, when he opened the bag, there was nothing inside except salt water and bubbles. In this account, the squonk is described as having red eyes, a long comical nose, and ill-fitting warty skin. Even the great American legend Paul Bunyan had such a run-in with a squonk in Paul Bunyan and His Great Blue Ox that Paul and his men are stalled in cutting timber when one hears a queer wailing some distance away. The more the man mimics the wailing, the closer the strange sound gets, until eventually he's able to apprehend an unsuspecting squonk in the bag. So rarely did it ever get near men that the logger who had caught the squonk was greatly elated, and called his friends to the bunkhouse to see the queer creature when he put it on view, reads Paul Bunyan. Alas, the logger's elation was only momentarily, as the squonk did what it does best, and dissolved in its distress into nothing but some salt water and bubbles. It is said in a compendium of North American cryptids and magical creatures that if the tears containing the dissolved squonk are separated into even smaller pools of tears, the squonk can perish, remaining dissolved in its own tears for eternity. Well, that's sad. That's real sad. Let's go to May 14th, 1946. The Snyder County Tribune gave us a page 6 byline describing the squonk. Titled The Squalling Squonk. Some cold winter night, as you sit before the roaring fire in a hunting lodge or in the bunkhouse of a lumber camp in the North Woods, you're certain to hear outside a long drawn-out moaning. But if you think it's the wind in the bare branches of the trees, you're mistaken. Your lumberjack friend will tell you it's a squonk, mourning because it has a warty, ill-fitting skin. That's all the squonk ever does, just goes wandering among the hemlock trees, weeping and sobbing bitterly because its skin doesn't fit. When the thermometer is down to 9 degrees above zero, you can follow it by the little globules of ice it leaves behind. The squonk's trail of frozen tears. That's That's an album title if I've ever heard one. The Squonk's Trail of Frozen Tears. Because it is such a shy, nocturnal animal, few men have ever seen a squonk. But once a lumberjack, imitating its cries, lured one into its cabin. The little beast seemed perfectly satisfied until he shut it up in a wicker basket. Then it began to sob and moan. This went on for hours, then died down. The lumberjack peeked into the basket to see if the squonk had cried itself to sleep, but all he found was the salt water and a few bubbles. The squonk had dissolved itself in its own tears. "I might have known better," said the lumberjack as he added one of his own tears to the collection, "than to have shut up a squonk in a basket made from branches of the weeping willow tree." Who? You know the story. You know the history. This is the 40s. By this time, the story of the squonk is well known. It's out there. You know it's dissolving. You know it's going to cry, and you're going to lose it. People. We need a container. We need a glass container, basically, is what I'm picking up from a lot of this. That you need, so when it dissolves, when it cries and dissolves, it doesn't leak out everywhere. It's not going to, I mean, you could catch it in a fishbowl or something. Something that's going to hold it. And then you can get yourself your squonk right back as soon as it reforms itself. What's its eating habits, you say? Well, obviously, squonks are herbivores. They love eating magical herbs, which makes them a nuisance for local farmers whose gate it can squeeze through easily. You may be wondering at this point, is there just one squonk? Are there multiple squonks? There are multiple squonks. It is not a singular entity like a lot of cryptids we run into. Some people believe the squonk reproduces through binary fission, meaning its body splits into two new bodies, which seems like that could be a logical explanation since it can break itself down into liquid form. It's a possibility, and some believe it produces in more natural ways and gives birth to its babies called squinks. How cute is that? So we talked about Tryon earlier, Henry Tryon. He is the author of Fearsome Critters. So Fearsome Critters came out was originally released in 1939. So about 30 years after the release of Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods. Let's go ahead and see what this book says. Not as nice description of the squonk, but either way, probably the homeliest animal in the world, and knows it. The distribution was once fairly wide, the usual habitat being high plains where desert vegetation was abundant. History shows beyond dispute that as these areas gradually changed to swampy, lake-dotted country, the squonk was forced to take to the water. Of distinctly low mentality, it traveled constantly around the unaccustomed marches in search of fodder. With time, it developed webbing between its toes, but only on the submerged left feet. Hence, on entering the water, it could swim only in circles and never got back to shore. Fossil bones dredged from these lake bottoms reveal that thousands perished of starvation in this manner. Today, the squonk is met with solely in the hemlock forest of Pennsylvania. It is a most retiring, bashful, crepuscular animal, garbed in a loose, warty, singularly ill-fitting skin. The squonk is always unhappy, even morbid. He is given to constant weeping over his really upsetting appearance and can sometimes be tracked by his tear-stained trail. Moonlight nights are best for squonk hunts, for then the animal prefers to lie quiet in its hemlock home, fearing, should it venture forth, that it may catch a glimpse of itself in some moonlit pond. Sometimes you can hear one weeping softly to himself. The sound is a low note of a pleading somewhat resembling the call of the cross-feathered snee. Cross-feathered snee. May have to look into that a little more on another episode. But there you have it. That is the history of the squonk. and where it has been published and shown up before. So the two main sources are Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods and Fearsome Critters, which was later released. So how did the Squonk gain popularity more recently? And where else has it shown up in recent pop culture? I know one of the big resurgences of the Squonk was its usage in memes. There was a lot of people that felt they could easily relate to the Squonk, and felt that a lot of its characteristics were very similar to their own. One of the more famous ones is there's a picture of the Squonk, and underneath it's got the Norman Osborn picture from Spider-Man, or the clip from Spider-Man where it says, "I'm a bit of a blank myself," and it just, people switch it to, "I'm a bit of a Squonk myself." But yeah, he showed up that way a little bit earlier. More recent, but not recent. The Squonk has appeared in a few songs by popular rock bands, including Genesis. The title of the song is actually Squonk, and it is definitely about the Squonk. It is not other subject material, and the title is just Squonk, which I always appreciate when artists make songs about cryptids. Synchronicity 2 by the Police was a fun one about the Loch Ness Monster. I'm sure there's some other ones I can't think of off the top of my head, but if you're looking... But the 70s had some cryptid love out there. So the song Squonk by Genesis it was released in 1976. It seems to follow J.P. Wentling as he tries to catch the Squonk. There's a fun musical fact. The album that has Squonk on it is the album when Genesis replaced Peter Gabriel with Phil Collins. Phil Collins was kind of doing the interviews of people trying to replace Peter Gabriel, but they couldn't really get the sound they wanted. So Phil Collins tried it, started singing about the Squonk, and they're like, hell yeah, that's what we're looking for. And the rest is history, as Phil Collins was lead singer of Genesis and also had a ton of hits on his own. Steely Dan contains in the song "Any Major Dude Will Tell You." It contains the line, "Have you seen a Squonk's tears? Well, look at mine." Dang. Not a huge Steely Dan fan. A few songs I like by him, but overall, and this song in particular as well, But Genesis has a special place in my heart. Squonk also appears in video games. Final Fantasy 14. If you don't remember seeing the Squonk in Final Fantasy 14, it is a rank B elite mark found in the Sea of Clouds. I'm a gamer, but I don't know what that means because I have not played Final Fantasy 14, unfortunately. Hopefully you have, and you have gotten to see this beautiful creature in person. The Squonk also shows up in the cryptozoology-themed collectible card game called MetaZoo. So get out there and get your Squonk MetaZoo card. Also, people all over the U.S. have turned the Squonk into a cultural icon. Not only are there books and songs about them, but they have a festival called Squonk-a-Palooza, which, if you are in Johnstown, Pennsylvania on Saturday, August 10th this year of 2024, you can go and celebrate the life of the Squonk as well. Why do they do it? To turn the frown upside down. Know that the Squonk is loved, which is all we all really need, right? All you need is love. Just a little love to get this Squonk out of its sad state. The most emo of cryptids we have gone over. So there you have it. The Squonk of Pennsylvania's Hemlock Forest. What do you think? Are they your new favorite cryptid? Sad little beasts that just need someone to tell them they're pretty. At the end of the day, I suppose we all want to hear compliments. This little This little critter just needs a little more than the rest of us. But I hope you have enjoyed learning about the squonk. I've enjoyed giving you all the information on the squonk here. I will give a shout out to another podcast because I got a lot of my information from Sinisterhood. This episode 239 covers the squonk. If you're wanting a nice, most of what they have in there, but I did not bring Grandpappy Flatbottom or Big Booty Judy into this episode, so you'll have to go and listen to them to hear more about Grandpappy Flatbottom and his wet sack. That's all the information I'll give. Give it a listen. It was a fun podcast. It was, out of all the podcasts I listened to, it probably was the most informative. And yeah, I'll include a link to that. I'll include a link to the episode in the show notes, along with everywhere else I went to gather information about the squonk. As a reminder, you can check out all of the socials for Doors of the Universe podcast at Linktree/DOTU podcast. That's linktr.ee/DOTU podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, give us a rating on Apple Podcast. That does help the podcast grow and makes us more available to people who share the same interests we all do. Because if you're listening to this, you probably have the same interests as I do, and it'd be great to grow this community. If you like this podcast and you would like to support it financially, we do have a Patreon set up, which is also in the link tree. Any money that comes in there will be going directly back towards items for the podcast. I mean, the money from that is what has helped with the getting all the new equipment, and hopefully I'm sounding much better now. My audio is at a pleasing level for you. We'll go ahead and close it out here with that. Thank you for listening. Please give the old episodes a listen if you hadn't had a chance to listen to them yet. As always, keep an eye to the sky. And if you happen to find yourself in the hemlock forest of Pennsylvania and you hear what sounds like the crying of a baby, go investigate a little further. If it's a squonk, let them know that they are truly beautiful inside and out. And if it's not a squonk, probably start running. I'll see y'all next time.